In a galaxy filled with countless species, there was one being who stood above them all, Queen Arana. Her name was whispered in fear and awe across planets, her power unrivaled by anyone. No one dared challenge her, and no one dared to approach her in the way others had with their leaders. Her empire was vast, and her strength, both physical and mental, was unmatched. For centuries, she had ruled her people with a strict and firm hand. Her beauty was also legendary, but it only added to her fearsome image. The stories about her were enough to make even the bravest hesitate. It was said that no one had ever spent a full night by her side and survived. Those who tried never returned. Some believed that those who spent too long in her presence were broken, their minds and bodies destroyed. It wasn't just her strength, but the weight of her presence, her loneliness, that crushed the spirit of those around her. She ruled alone, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. For most, the thought of spending a night with the queen was unthinkable. The mere mention of such a challenge sent shivers down the spine of even the most hardened warriors. And yet, despite her imposing rule, Queen Arana had become weary of her isolation. The constant fear she inspired had left her with no true friends, no true allies. She longed for something more, but dared not admit it. On a distant planet, in a small human settlement, Aiden sat in a quiet room, his eyes focused on a holographic image of the queen displayed before him. He had heard the legends, just like everyone else. The stories of her ruthlessness, her might, her beauty. Most of all, he had heard about the challenge that had been issued countless times. The invitation for a human to spend a night with her. Aiden was not like the others who feared her. He had fought in many battles across the galaxy and had seen things that others would never believe. A soldier, skilled in combat, and known for his unshakable bravery, Aiden had never been one to back down from a challenge. When the call came for a human to represent his species and face the queen, Aiden stepped forward. The crowd around him fell silent. They stared in disbelief as he volunteered to take on the impossible task. Many expected him to falter, to back down. But Aiden's mind was set. The thought of facing the most powerful ruler in the galaxy intrigued him more than it frightened him. What was the truth behind the queen's reputation? Why had no one ever lasted a night with her? With determination in his heart, Aiden prepared for his journey to the queen's palace. He was about to step into the unknown, where danger awaited, but so did the possibility of something more. An answer to the mystery that had haunted so many for years. In his heart, Aiden knew one thing. No matter how powerful she was, he was not afraid. The journey to the queen's palace was long and filled with anticipation. Aiden's ship traveled through the stars, passing distant planets and moons, each one more mysterious than the last. His mind, however, was focused on one thing, Queen Arana. The stories he had heard, the legends passed down from one generation to another, all led to this moment. Aiden had volunteered to face the one being no one dared challenge, and now he was closer than ever to meeting her face to face. As his ship descended onto the queen's planet, the grandeur of the palace became visible. Towering structures made of dark, ancient stone gleamed under the twin suns. The palace was as imposing as the queen herself, its architecture a reflection of her power and isolation. Aiden felt a shiver of excitement and curiosity. He had been trained for many battles, but this was something different. This was not about fighting enemies. It was about understanding the enigma of the alien ruler who had captivated the galaxy's imagination. When Aiden arrived at the palace, he was met by an entourage of royal guards. They were not human, their alien features stark and foreign, yet they showed no fear or surprise of his arrival. They had seen humans come and go, but none had ever dared take on the queen's challenge. He was the first. Inside the palace, the air felt heavy with history. The walls were adorned with paintings and sculptures depicting the queen's long reign and the battles she had fought. Each piece told a story of conquest, power, and the cold loneliness that seemed to follow her. As Aiden walked deeper into the palace, He could feel the weight of all those who had come before him, those who had failed, and those who had never returned. He was led into a grand hall where Queen Arana waited. Her figure stood tall, commanding, and as beautiful as the legends had described. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, her eyes deep and unreadable. She wore a flowing robe of crimson that seemed to shimmer as she moved. Her presence filled the room, the sheer force of it almost overwhelming. Aidan stood before her, his heart racing. There was no fear in his eyes, only curiosity and respect. He had heard the stories, but now he was standing in front of the woman who had been the subject of those very stories. This was no ordinary leader. This was a queen who had shaped the galaxy with her own hands. The queen's gaze softened as she studied him. There was something about Aidan that intrigued her. He did not tremble before her, nor did he treat her as a goddess or a tyrant. Instead, he saw her as just another being, complex and capable of more than just the power she wielded. It was a look she had not seen in many years. "You have come to face the challenge," she said, her voice like a melody of authority and curiosity. Aidan nodded. "I have." She studied him for a long moment, then spoke again, her tone changing slightly. "No human has ever survived a night in my presence. You understand the risks." "I do," Aidan replied confidently. "But I also believe there's more to you than just a legend." The queen's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of something unfamiliar: hope. No one had dared to speak to her like this, not since her early days of leadership. She studied him more closely, wondering what kind of man would walk into the lion's den without fear. "Very well," she said, her voice softening ever so slightly. "You may stay the night, but know this, human, you will not leave unchanged." Aidan smiled. "I'm ready." The challenge had begun, and as the queen turned to lead him deeper into her palace, Aidan could feel the weight of the night ahead of him. What awaited him was unknown, but he was determined to face it with the same courage that had led him to this moment. The queen had made her choice, and Aidan, without hesitation, had accepted. The doors to the inner chambers of the palace closed behind them with a heavy thud. The air inside was cool, but the tension was thick. Aidan followed Queen Arana down the long, dark corridors, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The walls seemed to breathe with history, each step taking him deeper into the heart of a place no human had ever truly known. The queen's presence was overwhelming, and yet Aidan felt a strange sense of calm. He had faced danger before, but this felt different. This was not just about survival, it was about discovery. As they walked, Aidan couldn't help but glance at the queen. Her regal posture, her confident stride, and the weight of her silence spoke volumes. But there was something more, something in the way she held herself that told him she was not just a ruler, but a prisoner of her own empire. The loneliness that had haunted her for so long was palpable. It wasn't just the vastness of her power that kept people at a distance, it was her isolation. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, lit by the soft glow of flickering torches. The room was filled with an eerie beauty, its walls covered in murals that told the story of the queen's reign. Giant stone pillars lined the edges, and in the center of the room stood a long, elegant table, laden with food and drink. The queen gestured for Aidan to sit at one end of the table while she took the other. As he sat down, Aidan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Here he was, face to face with the most powerful being in the galaxy, about to spend an entire night with her. It was a challenge no one had ever dared to take on, and yet he felt an odd sense of purpose. He was not here just to survive. He was here to understand. The queen, as if sensing his thoughts, spoke first. "You are brave, human. Few would have come this far. But tell me, why did you accept my challenge?" Aidan took a deep breath, looking directly into her eyes. "Because I wanted to see if the stories were true, and because I believe there's more to you than just the fear you inspire." Her gaze softened slightly, and for a brief moment, Aidan thought he saw something in her eyes, something fragile. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the queen's usual impenetrable mask. She leaned forward, her voice quieter now. "What do you think you'll find here, in my palace?" Aiden smiled. "I don't know, but I think I'll find the truth." There was silence between them for a moment. The queen studied him, as if trying to figure him out. Aiden, on the other hand, tried to learn everything he could from her. Her every movement, every word, seemed calculated, but there was something else lurking behind her eyes. A loneliness, a yearning for something she had long given up on. As they began to eat, the conversation shifted. They spoke about their worlds. Aiden's small, war-torn planet, and her massive empire. They spoke of their people, their struggles, and their dreams. With every passing hour, Aiden began to see the queen in a different light. She was not just a ruler. She was a woman who had lived a life full of sacrifice and hardship. She had carried the weight of an entire empire for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to simply be herself. The queen, in turn, seemed genuinely intrigued by Aiden. He was different from anyone she had ever met. Brave, yes, but also kind, and unafraid to question her authority. For the first time in ages, she felt a flicker of something inside her, a hope, perhaps, that she might not have to bear the weight of her world alone anymore. The night was just beginning, but already something had changed. Aiden was not just a challenge to the queen. He was the beginning of something new, and neither of them knew where it would lead. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere between Aiden and Queen Arana shifted. What had started as a tense meeting, filled with uncertainty, began to evolve into something else. The queen, for reasons she couldn't fully understand, felt an unfamiliar stir of curiosity. She found herself intrigued by Aiden, not just as a human, but as an individual. He was different from those she had met in the past. He wasn't awed by her, nor was he afraid. He treated her like anyone else, but with a sense of respect she hadn't known in years. It was then that the queen decided it was time for the next phase of the challenge. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "If you truly wish to understand me, human," she said, her voice low and steady, "then you must prove you are worthy of my trust. You will face 3 tests, each more difficult than the last. And should you fail, you will leave this place, never to return." Aiden nodded without hesitation. "I'm ready." The queen stood, her regal form casting a shadow over the room. "Then follow me," she commanded, and Aiden stood as well, falling into step behind her. They walked down another long corridor, this one darker and more foreboding. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, and the air seemed to grow heavier with each step. Finally, they arrived at a large open chamber. The queen turned to face Aiden, her eyes glinting with a mixture of determination and curiosity. "The first test," she said, "will test your strength and resolve." She raised a hand, and the ground beneath their feet rumbled. A moment later, a massive stone door began to open, revealing a large arena beyond. The arena was surrounded by towering walls, and in the center stood an enormous stone pillar. Aiden could feel the weight of the challenge in the air. "You must lift this pillar," the queen said simply. "Only then will you be allowed to proceed." Aiden's brow furrowed as he looked at the massive stone pillar. It was far larger than anything he had ever seen, its weight unimaginable. The challenge seemed impossible, but Aiden had never been one to back down from the impossible. He squared his shoulders and walked toward the pillar, his muscles tensing as he prepared to lift it. The queen watched him silently, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Aiden doubted himself, but then he remembered why he was here. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to prove something, to prove to the queen, to himself, and to everyone who had ever doubted him, that he could face the greatest of challenges without fear. With a grunt of effort, Aiden gripped the pillar. He strained every muscle, pushing against the immense weight. His arms trembled with the effort, and his breath came in ragged gasps. The stone felt as though it was glued to the floor, but Aiden's determination kept him moving. Slowly, inch by inch, the pillar began to shift. The queen's eyes narrowed as she watched, impressed by the human's persistence. She had seen countless beings try and fail, but Aiden's drive was unlike anything she had witnessed before. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something deeper, something personal. After what felt like an eternity, Aiden finally managed to lift the pillar just enough for it to fall into place. He collapsed to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The queen didn't speak at first. She simply regarded him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "You passed the first test," she said, her voice softer than before. Aiden wiped the sweat from his brow and stood up, still breathing heavily, but with a sense of pride in his eyes. "I'm not done yet." The queen smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened her usually stern features. "No, you're not. But you've earned my respect, human. And for that, I will allow you to face the next test." As the queen led him toward the next challenge, Aiden felt a sense of accomplishment, but he knew this was only the beginning. There were more tests to come, and he was ready to face them all. The night was far from over, and with each challenge, the bond between him and the queen grew stronger. But what would happen when the final test arrived? Neither of them knew, but one thing was certain. Aiden was not going to back down. Not now, not ever. The night grew deeper, and the atmosphere in the queen's palace shifted. After Aiden had passed the first test, the queen led him down yet another long hallway, this one dimly lit by glowing stones embedded in the walls. The palace seemed endless, filled with rooms and chambers that had stories of their own. Every step echoed, but this time, the sound wasn't filled with the tension of a challenge. It was quiet, almost peaceful. They reached a secluded room, unlike the grand halls Aiden had seen earlier. This one was smaller, more intimate, with tapestries hanging from the walls, depicting scenes of battles and triumphs. The air was different here, softer, filled with an energy that wasn't as cold as the rest of the palace. The queen turned to Aiden, her usual stern face now softened by something else. She motioned for him to sit by a low stone table where 2 cups of steaming liquid waited. Aiden hesitated for a moment but sat across from her. This was a different side of the queen, calm, reflective, almost vulnerable. The challenges had ended for now, and what came next was something Aiden hadn't expected. "Tell me, human," the queen began, her voice not as commanding as before. "What is it that you seek here? You came to face me, to prove yourself. But now, after seeing what I am capable of, why do you still stay?" Aiden looked at her, his thoughts carefully chosen. "I came to understand you. Not the stories others tell, not the legends. I wanted to know the real you." The queen studied him, her gaze intense yet thoughtful. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice quieter. "I've lived many years, fought many battles," she began. "But despite everything I've achieved, there has always been one thing I could never conquer: loneliness. I have ruled an empire, crushed my enemies, and watched civilizations rise and fall. Yet, no one has ever dared to be close to me. I have never had someone I could trust." Her words hung in the air, and Aiden could feel the weight of them. It was strange to hear the mighty queen speak of loneliness. He had seen her as a symbol of power, but now he saw a person, someone who carried a burden no one else could understand. "The stories about me are not all lies," the queen continued, her eyes distant as if reliving old memories. "I was not always like this. When I was young, I had allies, friends. But as my power grew, those around me began to fear me. They didn't understand my strength, and they feared that I would one day turn it on them. So they left. I built my empire, but in doing so, I lost everything I once held dear." Aiden sat in silence, processing her words. He had not expected this. The queen had always been seen as invincible, but now she was revealing the cracks in her armor. This was the side of her that few, if any, had ever seen. "Do you know what it's like to rule alone, Aiden?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To see the people you care for slowly drift away, not because they want to, but because they fear you. To be in a room full of people and still feel completely alone. Aiden nodded slowly. He had never been a ruler, but he knew what it felt like to be isolated, to be misunderstood. And in that moment, he felt an unexpected connection to the Queen. Despite their differences, they shared something, a deep, hidden loneliness that had shaped them both. I can't say I understand everything you've gone through, but I know what it's like to feel like no one sees you for who you really are, Aiden said softly. I don't fear you, Queen Arana. I see you. The Queen's eyes met his, and for the first time, she didn't look away. There was no challenge in her gaze, no test to be passed. Just two people, connected by something deeper than power or fear. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice almost fragile. The moment passed, but something had changed between them. The Queen, who had always ruled with an iron fist, now seemed a little less untouchable. Aiden, who had come to face a legend, now saw the woman behind the power. They both sat in silence for a long time, sharing a quiet understanding that neither had expected. The night was far from over, and more challenges lay ahead. But for now, they were just two individuals, each carrying their own weight, sharing a moment of honesty and connection. The night grew quieter as the conversation between Aiden and Queen Arana continued, and a shift began to take place in the air. What had started as a test of strength and resilience for Aiden had slowly turned into something more, something neither of them had anticipated. The walls that had stood between them, built by fear and pride, were beginning to crumble. After the Queen's admission of loneliness, there was an unexpected warmth in the air. The challenge now felt different. No longer was it about proving strength or survival. It was about understanding each other. Aiden had never expected this kind of connection. The Queen, in all her power, had opened up to him in a way no one else had ever seen. Aiden sat across from her, noticing the subtle change in her demeanor. Her posture was less rigid now, her usual air of invincibility replaced with a quiet vulnerability. She wasn't the untouchable ruler anymore. She was a woman, someone who had carried the weight of an empire for far too long. He spoke first, his voice gentle. I think you've been alone for too long, and maybe that's why you keep pushing people away. The Queen looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to figure out if he truly understood her. And what would you know about being alone? She asked, her tone not sharp, but curious. Aiden hesitated for a moment before answering. I've been alone in my own way. I've seen people come and go, lost friends and comrades in battles. But this, he gestured between them. This is different. I see something in you that others don't. It's not just the power, Queen Arana. It's the person underneath. For the first time that night, the Queen's stern face softened into something resembling a smile. It was a small, fleeting smile, but it was real. The walls she had carefully built to keep everyone at a distance had started to fall, and for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. She leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but steady. You're different from the others, Aiden. Most people come to me with their own agendas, fear, admiration, or the desire to challenge me. But you don't fear me. You look at me like I'm just another person. That's something I haven't felt in a long time. Aiden nodded. I think you've been alone for so long. You've forgotten what it feels like to just be seen for who you really are. Not as a queen, not as a symbol of power, but as a person with your own struggles. The Queen fell silent, her gaze drifting toward the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt peaceful now, as if the tension from earlier had dissolved. Aiden could sense that the Queen was contemplating his words, maybe even considering the possibility that there was more to life than ruling an empire and maintaining control. She broke the silence, her voice softer than before. I have always been the ruler. That's who I am. That's what I've had to be. But you make me question if there's more. Maybe I've forgotten what it means to be anything other than a queen." Aiden smiled, feeling a connection growing between them. "You don't have to be just a queen, Arana. You can be whoever you want. Maybe, for once, you can let someone else carry some of the weight." The queen looked at him, her eyes filled with something unfamiliar: trust. It was a fleeting moment, but in that instant, Aiden realized that their bond had shifted. This was no longer just about a human challenging a queen. It was about two people who had found something in each other that neither had expected: understanding. As the night wore on, the challenges and tests continued, but they no longer felt like obstacles. For the first time, Aiden saw the queen not as a ruler to be feared, but as someone who had been looking for connection, just like him. And for the first time, the queen allowed herself to see someone else, not as a pawn or a subject, but as an equal. This was only the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, but both were now ready to face together. The night was drawing to a close, but the tension between Aiden and Queen Arana had shifted. What had once been a fierce battle of strength and power had transformed into something more delicate. A conversation between two beings who, against all odds, had started to understand each other. The queen, who had never trusted anyone enough to show vulnerability, now found herself questioning everything she had once believed about herself and the world around her. Aiden sat across from her, feeling the weight of the night settling in. The second test had been a mental challenge, a game of strategy and wit that tested both of their intellects. Though the queen had expected him to fail, Aiden had once again surprised her with his insight and quick thinking. She had underestimated him in the beginning, but now she could see he was more than just a human. He was a force to be reckoned with. The two of them sat in the dimly lit chamber, the silence between them comfortable, though filled with unspoken words. The queen's usual stoic expression was softened now, and Aiden noticed that her shoulders, which had always been so tense, seemed to relax. After a long pause, Queen Arana spoke, her voice hesitant. "I've lived my entire life with this empire on my shoulders. I've made decisions that have affected countless lives, both for better and worse. I've seen entire civilizations rise and fall because of my choices, but no matter how much I've accomplished, I've never been able to shake this feeling inside, this emptiness." Aiden didn't say anything at first. He simply listened. He had known from the beginning that the queen's power was only a small part of who she was. Underneath the throne and the crown, there was a woman who had sacrificed everything. And now she was beginning to realize the price she had paid. "I always thought that power would fill the void," she continued, her voice growing softer. "But it hasn't. It's only made me more alone. No one dares to come close to me. They fear what I can do." Aiden leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "You don't have to carry it all alone. You've built an empire, yes, but there's more to life than just power." The queen's eyes flickered with something: doubt, fear, maybe hope. It was hard to tell, but for the first time, Aiden could see it. A crack in her armor. She wasn't just the invincible ruler anymore. She was someone who had sacrificed so much and now, for the first time in years, was allowing herself to question everything. "I've ruled for so long," the queen whispered. "I've ruled with strength and fear, but I've never known love. I've never known companionship. What if I've made a mistake? What if it's too late for me to change?" Aiden stood up and walked over to where she sat. He didn't hesitate. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture, but it was enough to break the tension that had held them both captive for so long. "It's never too late," he said quietly. "You're not a monster. You're not just a queen. You're a person, just like anyone else, and it's okay to let someone in. You don't have to carry all this weight by yourself anymore." The queen's eyes were filled with a mix of emotions: pain, confusion, and something else, something that had been buried for a long time. Longing. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "You don't fear me." Aiden shook his head. No, I don't. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. The weight of her words and actions, everything she had built, was crashing down on her. But for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Maybe you're right, she said softly. Maybe it's time to stop being alone. Aiden smiled, a warmth in his eyes. You don't have to be. Not anymore. In that moment, something shifted between them. The queen, who had always ruled with fear and distance, was finally starting to let go of the walls she had built around herself. And Aiden, who had come to face a legend, had found something much more valuable. A woman who was more than just her crown, her power, or her reputation. She was someone who had been waiting for a chance to let go of her loneliness and open up to the possibility of something different. The night was far from over, but now, it felt like a turning point for both of them. Aiden had faced the queen's challenges, and now he was helping her face her own demons. But there were still more trials ahead. And no matter what happened next, they both knew that this was only the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The quiet after their shared moment was a fragile thing, but the peace didn't last long. As Aiden and Queen Arana sat together, the weight of the night hanging between them, a loud crash echoed from the outside. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly, the calm replaced by an unsettling tension. Aiden was the first to react. His instincts, honed by years of battle, kicked in immediately. He stood, scanning the room, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. The queen, too, rose with a speed that belied her usual calm demeanor. Her sharp eyes narrowed, her posture once again that of the powerful ruler ready to defend her domain. "What is it?" Aiden asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension. The queen's expression darkened. "It's them." Without another word, she motioned for him to follow, and the two of them quickly left the chamber. They moved through the palace, which now seemed ominously quiet. The once imposing halls felt strangely empty, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. As they turned a corner, the source of the disturbance became clear. The palace gates were shaking, the metal groaning under the strain of something massive pressing against them. Outside, a dark, foreboding ship hovered, its engines humming with power. "They've come for me," Queen Arana murmured, her voice cold. "They are the Corrin, an enemy faction from the Outer Rim. They'd been a thorn in my side for years, but now they're trying to take what's mine." Aiden's mind raced. The Corrin were known across the galaxy for their ruthlessness. They had no loyalty, no mercy, and if they were attacking now, it meant they had learned something about the Queen's vulnerability, a vulnerability she had only just started to show. The Queen's eyes flashed with determination. "I will not let them take this empire. Not now." Without hesitation, she led Aiden to a large chamber that was hidden deep within the palace. Inside, the walls were lined with advanced weaponry, weapons designed for someone of her power. She quickly armed herself, the familiar weight of her weapons seeming to bring her back to the commanding force she was known to be. Aiden stood at her side, watching as she prepared for battle. There was no fear in her eyes now, only the fierce resolve of someone who would protect her home at all costs. "You're not facing them alone," Aiden said, his voice resolute. "I'm with you." The queen nodded, a rare moment of respect passing between them. She had once ruled alone, but now, for the first time, she felt that she didn't have to. Aiden had proven himself to her in ways no one else had. And now, as the Corrin drew closer, she knew that together, they had a chance to defend everything she had built. They moved toward the main entrance, the sounds of the enemy growing louder with each step. As they neared the gates, the queen turned to Aiden, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Stay close, human. This won't be easy." Aiden met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The gates to the palace burst open with a deafening sound, revealing the full force of the Corrin fleet. Their soldiers, armored and relentless, stormed forward, their weapons drawn and ready. Aiden and Queen Arana stood side by side, facing the oncoming threat. The battle for the Queen's palace and for their future was about to begin. The battle had been fierce. The Corran forces were relentless, but Aiden and Queen Arana stood firm, defending the palace with everything they had. Aiden's training as a soldier had served him well. His quick reflexes and sharp mind allowed him to hold his ground against the invading forces. The Queen, too, fought with a cold precision, her movements swift and calculated as she unleashed her power. Together, they were unstoppable. The Corran soldiers, despite their superior numbers, were no match for the combined strength of a human who refused to back down and a queen who had been fighting alone for too long. The Queen's leadership skills were evident in every strike, every command, as she guided her troops into action. But it was Aiden's bravery, his refusal to show fear, that turned the tide of the battle. As the last of the Corran soldiers were pushed back, the battlefield fell into a heavy silence. The sounds of weapons clashing, the shouts of the soldiers, and the hum of energy blasts were replaced by the quiet settling of dust and debris. The battle was over, and the Queen's palace was safe. For now. Aiden stood panting, his body covered in dirt and sweat, his heart still racing from the fight. His eyes scanned the battlefield, taking in the fallen Corran soldiers and the damage done to the palace. He had never been in a fight like this before, but there was no time to dwell on it. He turned to the Queen, who stood a few feet away, her posture regal even in the aftermath of the battle. She was breathing heavily, but her face showed no signs of weariness. Instead, there was a look of quiet satisfaction, the kind that came with a hard-won victory. "You did well," the Queen said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I didn't expect you to hold your ground so well. You're more than just a soldier, Aiden." Aiden nodded, though his eyes were still focused on the aftermath of the fight. "I couldn't have done it without you, Your Majesty. You're not just a queen. You're a warrior." The Queen's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "Maybe. But today, it was your courage that made the difference." Aiden's heart swelled at her words. He had come here expecting nothing more than a challenge, a test of strength. But what he had found was something far more important. A woman who had been carrying the weight of her empire alone for too long. A queen who had learned to trust someone again. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice a rare mixture of gratitude and respect. "You've shown me something today, Aiden. You've reminded me of what it's like to fight for something more than just power." Aiden met her gaze, his expression serious. "You don't have to fight alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll stay by your side, no matter what." The Queen nodded, her eyes filled with something deeper than mere appreciation. It was trust, the kind of trust that had been absent in her life for so long. For the first time, she wasn't alone in her fight. As the soldiers began to regroup and the palace staff tended to the wounded, the Queen and Aiden stood side by side, watching the aftermath of the battle. The world around them had changed, but one thing remained clear. Together, they could face whatever came next. The battle had been won, but it was only the beginning of something greater. Aiden had not only helped her defend her empire, but he had also given her something she thought she had lost forever: hope. And in that moment, Queen Arana knew that no matter the future, they would face it together. The aftermath of the battle was both calming and chaotic. Soldiers worked to clear the battlefield, removing fallen Corran soldiers and checking for any remaining threats. The palace, though scared by the fight, stood strong. The once quiet halls now echoed with the sounds of recovery, and the air was filled with a sense of cautious relief. Aiden and Queen Arana stood on the balcony, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched beyond the palace walls. The sky was a deep purple, with the last rays of the twin suns dipping below the horizon. The distant hills, once covered with the shadow of an incoming invasion, now lay peaceful. "I thought this would never end," the Queen said softly, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her voice, usually so commanding, carried a touch of vulnerability now. Aiden stood beside her, his eyes also lost in the distance. He had come here expecting a battle of power, but now, after everything they had faced together, he realized that the true fight was not just for survival, it was for something much more important: trust. "It's over now," Aiden said. "You did it. You defended your empire." Queen Arana didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed ahead, but there was a slight change in the way she stood, less like a ruler, and more like someone who had found a companion. She turned to Aiden, her gaze no longer filled with the coldness she had carried for so long. "You know, I've never allowed anyone this close to me," she said quietly. "Not like this. I've been afraid. Afraid that if I let anyone in, they'd only see me as a ruler, that they'd fear what I could do." Aiden met her gaze, his expression steady. "But I don't fear you," he said simply. "I see you for who you really are." The Queen's lips parted slightly, as if she had never really thought anyone could look past her title, her power, and see her as a person. For the first time, the weight of her responsibilities seemed to lessen. "I know," she replied. "And that's why I'm not alone anymore." Aiden smiled, feeling a warmth inside that he hadn't expected. "No, you're not." The Queen's eyes softened. "I spent so many years building this empire, fighting off enemies, keeping people at a distance. I thought I could survive on my own, that I didn't need anyone else. But now, after all of this," she paused, her voice barely a whisper, "I don't want to be alone anymore." Aiden's heart swelled with something he didn't quite understand. The Queen, once the embodiment of strength and isolation, had found something in him that she had been missing her whole life. Someone who saw her as more than just the ruler of an empire. And now he had found in her someone who was not just a powerful monarch, but a woman capable of love, trust, and connection. "You don't have to be alone," Aiden said, his voice low and sincere. "You've shown me strength, and now I want to be by your side, not just as a soldier, but as someone who believes in you, in what you can be." The Queen looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she nodded. "And you will be." The future was uncertain, filled with challenges both within and outside the palace walls. But for the first time in years, Queen Arana felt ready to face it. With Aiden by her side, she was no longer just the ruler of an empire. She was a person with someone who cared, someone who understood her, and someone who believed in her. The battle had been won. The palace had been defended. And now, a new chapter began, one where she was no longer alone. Together, they would face whatever came next.